Meeting to order for the Solar Tech Committee. We'll get started on it, and we'll start it. Amy, if you can give us a little bit of a review of what we accomplished at our last meeting and the changes that we did incorporate. Don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but wanted to highlight and go forward from there.
Of course. So I did hand out updated packet. As always, kind of we track changes, right? Strike through and underline from the very beginning, just so you can see all of those. And then what I've done on the topics 1 through 11, I've highlighted, it's gray, anything that's changed since your last meeting, right? So that way you can kind of see the actual changes. So if you remember back on September 10th, the first meeting, we went through topics 1 through 8. And then last meeting, we went back through those topics 1 through 8, and then made it through topics 9 to 11. So I'll run through those, just kind of the grade changes since those, if you follow along. So there was nothing in topic 1 that changed. Topic 2, the word is instead of if is as, so super minor. There was no changes in 3, which is glare, 4 for signal interference, or 5 for sound levels that we discussed last meeting and the meeting before. Fencing had bigger updates from the at the last meeting. And so you can kind of see the few gray highlights on number 6 on page 3 that did change. It was just adding drainage areas in, specifying top rail because that ASTM does include the top rail specs. And then really just some minor things on that change since the last meeting. Those few gray highlights on number 6 for fencing. Then if you go to the next page, number 7, which is stormwater, that did not have changes since the last meeting. And then number 8 was maintenance, damage, and repair. And the only changes on that since the last meeting are the gray highlights at the top of page 5, which just specified that that infrastructure has to be the same or better condition. And that drainage board is going to inspect that after installation, just to specify those things for what we got from the last meeting. So those were the ones that were discussed on September 10th, and then briefly again gone through on the October meeting date. Starting on number 9, this is what we discussed last meeting in October. So this is topic 9 is the construction management and road use plan or agreement. There were only a few changes on that page 5, because you can see that we did specify the highway department and board of commissioners will approve those road use agreements. And it does not have to be submitted prior to, we said application specified as a special exception application, so you know which type. Continuing on page 6 on that same topic, we did change it from 1 ton to 10 tons. That was what we all thought was much more reasonable. And then added the provisions for dust control, and G you'll see there. And then added the provision that there should be a surety bond that's determined by the highway department on that as well. So nothing major, just some of those minor changes that we had last meeting. 10 had the biggest discussion, if you remember that last meeting. We had lots of discussion. We probably spent the vast majority of the meeting on that one, which was the development plan and site plan requirements. I think at the end we were all kind of on the same page, but this one did have some changes. I'll at least run through really quickly. We are still requiring the development plan to be submitted with a special exception concurrently application. Basically, it notes there on number 1 that, again, this is more of a reminder that development plans are not approved by BZA, but they can be, again, used as a written commitment or anything of that nature if BZA does approve a special exception. So we did specify number 2 there, though, that it actually, it shall be all BZA approvals shall include a written commitment that binds the project owner to that site plan. So we're not just like concerned about the whole special development plan application of the site plan. And then basically any changes need to be approved by BZA is what kind of the A and B under there is. It continues on to page 7 then, and these really just added a few more details on what was included in that site plan. So again, it needs to outline it for each parcel. And this was one of the kind of back and forth, I think. We wanted a site plan, you can get all of your tax assessments off of this then, and know kind of where everything's gonna be. We did add square footage within the fenced area so that eventually assessor's office can have that as easily kind of transposed to tax assessments. We also looked at access points and making sure that was clarified in terms of where the driving, areas, service road and access points are. Flip-flopped our 1 and 2 foot contour lines, and then added the provisions for dust control on there as well. So at the end of the day, that would get you, again, a detailed site plan for each parcel as we go through those, so you can, BZA can make sure that they can see what's happening on each parcel, neighbors can see what's happening on each parcel, and then ultimately assessor's office could have that information too. That was one of the bigger ones from last meeting. And then topic 11 was decommissioning plan. So that goes on to page 8. You can see the gray highlights or the changes since the last meeting. Again, it's just saying decommissioning plan is not required to be approved prior or submitted with a development plan or special exception application. What we did discuss though is that the site restoration plan, affidavit of responsibility, and the binding agreement, which are outlined below, should be submitted or have to be submitted with the special exception application. So we don't care at that point about things like your bonding or your decommissioning cost estimates, because that can come later. But we do want some of those, again, how are they going to restore the site? And then making sure that the affidavit of responsibility, that is just the notarized statement saying the property owners understand that ultimately they're the quote landlord. And then that binding agreement is just the written terms, seeing that the written terms of the decommissioning plan is binding upon future owners of those properties. So those things were added in there. We did add in underneath the required bond that it's just for a minimum of a 1 year period. That was taken back from, added in terms of some of the research that had been done. And then it has to be in place prior to the start of any construction activities or site disturbance. And then we specified at the bottom of 9 that annual permit is approved by the PC, and added in the list on the top of page 10 that it would also include just the amount of energy produced in the past, past year, which is reported, to other entities anyway. So that's where we kind of ended in terms of our last meeting, those last 3 topics. Are there questions on those?
I got one.
Yeah.
Where was it discussed on the staging area for the construction? Do we have anything anywhere on that?
On the staging area? No, we had talked about, again, in terms of the road use agreement. Let me go back to that one. That's where we had discussed it. Let me go back a little more. All right. So we do make them identify what their maintenance of traffic plan is.
The reason I bring it up is I talked to one of the other,
Here it is.
another county and one of the commissioners at the time where they had a big solar operation going in at Jasper. And one of the things that they didn't think about was the staging was too close to residents.
Yeah, we do have that identified in here.
And it needed to be as far away from a house as it could. For a matter of fact, at this particular one, they had to repaint the house because of all the dust and there was a sandy area and it was kind of beating up the house quite a bit. And the construction company agreed to paint the house, and the neighbor or the resident was happy, but at the same time, they were dealing with a lot of dust and debris. So I didn't know if we had anything.
We do on page 6. So it outlines that public road use agreement shall include at a minimum the following, and then it lists A through H. So number D, or item D, is staging or holding areas that will be used for equipment and vehicles waiting to access a site or parcel. So that should be identified as part of that road use agreement. They would identify where those are, and then again, that can be considered from there.
So who would make that determination?
So that the road use agreement on the previous page, it's approved by the highway department and the board of
So
commissioners.
this is the area, not the road wasn't the issue.
Right, this is an area, like if it's gonna be.
It was the residents living by the staging area off the road. That's where the damage was.
Mm-hmm. So this would at least identify, again, they're not gonna stage on public right of way, usually because there's not gonna be enough room. It's gonna be on a parcel somewhere. you know,
Under the,
typically.
I think it was asked, under the road agreement,
Mhm.
would the commissioners have the authority to be able to say, no, this staging area isn't going to work, it's too
Because
house to
you're
home?
10
Yeah.
feet from the house.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's where they have discretion to kind of say these are appropriate or not appropriate, including like, again, what routes they're gonna be used for vehicles weighing more than 10 tons. They think that route's not appropriate because you know that your sub base on that road is subpar, you know what I mean? Or it's a gravel road.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the road, it's the,
Right.
where the construction guys are all meeting, lights coming on over, you know, in the lot, let's say. And that was what that commissioner said was something that they didn't consider when they approved
And
everything.
Warren had given, and I think, I don't know where you got that idea too, because we previously discussed it, and that's where that staging or
Okay,
So
holding
the
area did
commissioners
come
would be able
from.
to address that,
Yeah.
and take it into consideration when they were doing the agreement as such.
When you think they would have more than one staging area too, if you're going
They
to
may have.
acres, they would probably have more than
And
one.
yeah, we do see staging or holding areas.
Wouldn't that be in the site plan originally?
So
Not
instruction
necessarily, no.
not necessarily for the
No.
use, just the staging area.
The
would.
staging areas aren't necessarily in the site plan.
You would think they would be.
Unless it's
At
on-
least the construction project that we're with, they tell us where we're putting our, this is your staging area, right here, that's it.
Yeah.
And, you know, everybody has designated staging
And
areas, but
typically
they're
it's-
planned,
On that same parcel right next to it, because it's
right,
but this is
you're using it.
a little more spread out, so it
So that
Can you
thing they
just
would
put
have
it in
one
the
on one.
setbacks as well,
was.
so far from the house?
We didn't
mean-
specify anything of that nature, but it is, again, in my opinion, it's open for them to.
That we could add it to our setbacks so far from the house.
You could, yeah. And we do have setbacks on the agenda tonight.
And one other point to go back and revisit briefly on the decommissioning. At the time, we had raised that from 100 to 120%. And I think part of the reason we were at the 120% was what Orion had mentioned that they were committing to do if this previous project had been approved. I've looked at quite a few other counties on that, and 125 seems to be a little bit more of a common number that's being used than the 120. The amount shall be equal to 120 of the estimate.
Yes, that one.
Any
yeah.
thoughts on making that 125 instead of the 120?
Well, I know there's a county, I don't remember exactly which one, but they had 150.
Some do have 150, but I think that's probably when we can reevaluate it every number of years that we do, that may.
But
be
you're
the case.
bonding on like subdivision road infrastructure is 125, is that correct?
It's probably,
I don't know
yeah.
off the top of my head, but
So we bring
that's
it in
the
line
typical
with that.
one, what that is. Okay, so this should be one. So on page 8, for A,
Everyone comfortable with that? Okay. How many years? Every 3?
so it's 100, and it's, that is reevaluated at every 5 years, the value of that.
Orion made the recommendation of 3 years. I think if we're gonna go with that, we ought to do look at 3.
To reevaluate the cost of
The bond,
decommissioning?
Yes.
Okay.
Every 3. We on the same page on that?
I've got a question, do we include anything about, requiring them to recycle when they do decommission, do we have that?
We haven't at this point. Ours states in disposed of in accordance with Jefferson County
Solid waste.
solid waste district
And there's state and federal.
and state and federal side of it.
I think up to like 90% of the panel can be recycled anyway.
What's that?
I think up to 90% of a panel can be recycled, is that a correct statement? I don't know.
I know that some counties, I can't refer to which one it is, but they do require that they be in a recycled, like what Lisa's saying.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's what we wanna do, but a lot of them do because of landfill, how much area it fills in the landfill
Right,
that,
that's what I'm thinking, why put it in a local landfill or even Medora if we don't have to?
Thoughts on that?
I agree with Lisa, if everybody else does, I think it'd be more, the green of us if we do that.
Right,
If
yeah.
you wanna say.
If this
use
is
that
about
term.
green energy, why would we put more things in the landfill?
There's the language they use, it's recycle or reuse as such.
Yeah. Alright,
That brings us up to date.
that brings us, to date, so topic 20 onward are the ones that have not been discussed yet. Again, based on comments from the last committee meeting, you'll see some gray, highlights in these sections, but those were things that you guys had wanted to add on. It also does include at the very end, those 3 new topics that the committee asked, to be considered, which would be 17, 18, and 17, 18, 19, and 20, excuse me. 4. It was the maximum size per project, consideration of each parcel, which is, making sure the BZA is looking at each parcel and not, we can talk through that one in a minute. UL certification, and then location, which is prohibited locations like floodplains, you know, some general places that would be prohibited. So we start with number 12, because some of these are big topics, so I want to try to at least push through these tonight and see if we can at least get discussion on all of them. So the permitted districts is the zoning land use table and kind of definitions of those are on number 12. So you'll see that again, the thought between this is right now, currently commercial solar is not a permitted use in a district. It is a special exception in ag, I1 and I2. And then it is a special exception in neighborhood and general business if it's less than 10 acres. So that's not what, we've really been discussing necessarily. So the first part of this would be actually amending those definitions. So part of this is trying to get in line from the primary to the commercial term. And so we're defining again that accessory, that it's really where it's used for on-site, right? So if I'm gonna put it on my house, the roof of my house or whatnot, or if I've got an industrial use, I'm gonna put it on that type of roof or use it primarily for on-site. That's not necessarily what we're saying. We're also defining though that BESS is considered, which is the battery energy storage systems. Those are considered as a separate use. That was part of what we had discussed, the committee had discussed wanting to look at. So when we define what commercial SES is, again, it's still defined as that solar energy system that's freestanding, serves as primary use in the parcel, and where we've added in where the energy is intended primarily for offsite use, which is what it would be. We've taken out the distinctions between community scale, large scale, pollinator friendly, because those definitions really aren't being used now. But we've added in that the SES, commercial SES may include solar collector devices, solar related equipment, other accessory structures and buildings, including the light reflectors. It gives a variety of those items. It does define that BESS, which is battery energy storage, is considered a separate use by the UDO. That was what the committee had kind of asked for. So the only, besides those definition changes, the only idea on this is that if you wanted to, the debate is on the ag. Do you want it to be an ag? So right now I've left it because I didn't necessarily know where that discussion was gonna go. That was the initial prompt for kind of some of these revisions. I have removed on the less than 10 acres in the business districts, I removed or accessory ground mounted since we're getting rid of some of these definitions. So I think the debate is right now, or it was suggested at the beginning to look at and consider ag. My personal opinion is that I do get very nervous when someone might come and want to try to rezone a lot of our rural area to industrial, because there's a lot of things that are permitted uses in that you don't want out in the county. They're not appropriate for one reason or another. So if it goes, and if it has to be rezoned to an industrial, then you've got to rely on the planning commission and the commissioners putting a written commitment on that it can't be all these other uses, right? That we don't want out in the county. So by leaving it in the ag, it keeps your base zoning intact, which I think, again, from just a best practice, what I would typically look for is, it doesn't open that loophole to put a bunch of industrial uses out in the ag area. It still has to go through a special exception, public hearing, all of that stuff. It just, maybe protects some of the unintended. That's kind of where typically I would kind of recommend, but.
So your concern is if we switch zoning and it doesn't end up going into solar, that then it's,
It's not
Can be-
industrial.
but but can't the planning commission, let's say it was rezoned for solar
Mhm.
to light industrial, let's say. And then, that fell through. The planning commission on its own without, can convert it back to ag at any time.
There's a
Plus
process.
the problem, the same
Oh,
way
you
it goes,
can't.
the same way to get it into planning, to indict industrial, the same process to go back to ag. You don't have to have a landowner approach you, the planning commission, and like, for
Correct.
example, Marble Hill,
But
it's industrial. The planning commission can make a motion that we convert that back to agriculture.
you
And then
can-
we have
yeah,
a
you
public
can-
hearing and all
You
that.
can initiate,
stuff.
plan commissioner, board of commissioners can initiate a rezoning. Or else it's 50% of the property owners in that area. But the issue becomes you have to then go back through a process just to get it back to ag. You know, the safer is if you do rezone it to industrial, you put a written commitment on there that has to be recorded with a deed that says you can't do anything but this.
You can do that.
But then it requires, again, extra steps to be done that might not be done. So that's where I personally feel more comfortable with ag, because I'd rather my base uses be ag and not my base uses be all these other industrial uses.
As you said, you add another step, because I don't think we would want to make it to where it is an allowed use industrial, to where as soon as you change the zoning, that it could automatically be solar. And so if you don't do that, it's going to have the zoning change through the plan commission, then the final say on the zoning by the commissioners, then it's gotta go back to the BZA to have a special exception issued on it. And in general speaking, the commissioners have expressed they're more comfortable with the process staying with the BZA than it coming into the politics of the commissioner side of it.
Yeah, it does add an extra set of hearings that are required too.
And I want to keep things moving this evening as such,
Yeah.
but I think this is an important enough issue. Any thoughts from the audience? If so, on ag versus industrial, or, because those have been, stand up and tell us your name and.
Brenda Vance, if you change this permanently, I mean, you do a zoning change to industrial, and then you try to convert it back, if there's some other industrial company that's looking at that site, they can take it to court and challenge, because you already said industrial use. So once you change it, you're gonna have a very hard time of getting it changed back to ag.
That's always my concern, is it's just hard to get it. It takes a lot to get it back. If in communities where you don't, you want it to be a zone change, if you'd rather go through that process in special exception, I would say, okay, then you need to create some sort of renewable energies district and make it permitted in that district, because it's not anywhere on your map. So it has to go through your zone change process, in order to get to that anyway. But that way you don't have all these other uses floating around as permitted in that, and doesn't create, like what you were saying, more a multi-step.
And just from the observations that I've seen around the state, a little different. On one side, you would think you'd want elected officials making the decision, but yet from what I can see, the BZAs, the way they're appointed and the way they're set up, they're basically set up, they're judges as such. And from what I can see, they're quasi judges, they tend to actually are able to act a little bit more independently, and they're not pressured on the political side as much as what commissioners would be as such.
By state statute, no one can reach out to a BZA member with the intent of petitioning or changing a mind on a application.
For example, on the solar, on the city side of things, the plan commission had unanimously looked at it and said, no, we're not gonna change the zoning. But then it went to the commissioners for the final say on the city council, the equivalent of the commissioners. And that was a much closer vote. There was much more area there to be able to bring pressure to bear than what there is to bring on a BZA. So personally, I'm fairly comfortable with leaving it as a special exception for a BZA, but I'm not on the BZA.
That's a lot of pressure put on there, yeah. As you went through, and that's the only reason I was thinking is, and I see that point. My concern, or what I thought was, the more levels, the more people that looked at something, the more of a unified, you know, takes less pressure, so it'd have to go through three, you know, like you just said,
Yeah.
planning commission, then commissioners, then back to the BZA, and it gives more opportunity. But once again, you bring up a good point about political pressure and wanting to be reelected sometimes can make people make wrong decisions sometimes.
And in fairness to the applicant, applicant and adjoining landowners, we know how long this process lasted. You know, it stretches out for months. You add two
You
more
wanna do it 3
steps in it,
times?
you could triple that length of time, and that's not a good scenario for community either.
I hear both sides. My concern of leaving it in ag is in my opinion, it goes against our comprehensive plan of preserving agricultural land. And I don't see it as, I see it as a solar power plant, not anything to do with agricultural land or farming. So to me, it's just an incomparable land use. I don't know how we can allow it in the ag when it doesn't go. And for example, like when we did these ordinances a couple of years ago, we took out the used car dealership. And I don't remember the exact name. I think it was like use number 151 or 152 or something like that. Because, and the reason was it didn't fit in the agricultural district. So to me, this is even on a more of a difference than the used car lots that we took out of ag. So I understand the rezoning part of it, but I just am torn with this. I just don't agree with it being an ag. And then my other comment is, if you take it out of ag and you have an application that wants to do a rezone and put it in an ag district, and that application is one application per parcel, and they have its own meeting, its own hearing on the application for a rezone. Am I understanding correctly that we decided to let that be one application per parcel, as instead of looking at the whole set of it, you're just looking at one application?
We've talked about having some discussion a little bit later.
That's
this
one that
evening.
we are gonna
That we-
discuss
we
later, 'cause
discussed,
I
yes.
have some good thoughts on sanity of the, on BCA members, staff and applicant and neighbors on that too. I think there's some logistics on that
On
that
both sides.
need to be functioned and finessed. But here, that's not what we're talking, here we're just talking about districts, so should it be in, what district should it be allowed by special exception in? And so that's what, I think, we'll get to that next topic though, on that.
I understand, yeah. To me,
Mhm.
one goes with the other,
Okay.
you know?
Yeah.
But I don't agree with it being an ag. I know there's a risk of the rezone.
Okay. All right.
Can you put conditions on the zoning if the project is not approved?
You
and
can,
it
that's what I said,
not
like,
get
those
rezoned?
written commitments, you can say that it, you know, it's being rezoned to I-1, but the only permitted use shall be the, you know what I mean, or, you know what I mean, or you can say, or these 12 uses that are permitted in I-1 are not permitted. But then it requires the planning commission and the commissioners to actually put that condition on the approval. Personally, I always like to see them as written commitments, meaning that they get recorded, so that it's with the deed, because if not, it goes in some file folder, and how easily you gonna find that, right? Not easily, but then it's at least documented in a recordable fashion. But then it also still takes, again, those 2 extra steps, plus then somebody knowing it's recorded with the deed in the future. So again, it can function that way, and that's, if you're gonna do that, that's what I would strongly recommend. Or, as I said, you go just to a whole new zoning district and you make it permitted by right in that zoning district, because it won't exist on your map, and it's some sort of renewable energies district or something. That puts those things in there. So then all your other industrial stuff is not permitted.
I agree with Belinda. That is a lot of steps. If you change it to industrial, then you change it back. And that, like the lady says, you know, people may fight that.
They might, and that's the risk you're gonna run.
If we just leave it in ag and it's in a special exception.
Yes,
Like a special
Hi,
exception.
Christy Marshall. I have a question and a statement. So I agree with Lynette and Dave's, point to, it doesn't align with agricultural use. And it obviously doesn't go along with our comprehensive plan, regarding agriculture. What are the risks and the benefits of making its own rezone district, as you mentioned? I had not seen that in other ordinances,
So it's a different
That's
process, so that decision then ultimately lands with the commissioners, versus the BZA, so that was your kind of first discussion that you guys already had. So I mean, that's if you're gonna take it out of ag, in my mind, the benefit is that you don't have the possibility of all these other industrial, things going on. It is a longer process and, sometimes a more politically driven, rezonings are sometimes more politically driven than, again, non-political. And so that is your biggest kind of pros and cons, I guess, with that.
If you established a zoning district that was just strictly solar, and so it would start with the plan commission. If, let's say, the plan commission gives an unfavorable recommendation or a favorable, whichever way they would go, the next step then, it goes to the commissioners. And the commissioners have the final say, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't be a special exception if it was changed to that zoning, it would go in at that time. And so there's a trade-off both directions there.
And if you did that, I'd put your solar, I'd put wind, I'd put battery energy storage, put all of those things in that district. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's sort of, again, energy district.
I have a question about if you change that to a solar district or some type of industrial district, what's that gonna do to the landowners' property taxes? Because ultimately, they still own the land.
It won't change your property taxes,
Until it's,
because those are based
until the
on the
purpose
use.
use, when the use
So-
actually has to change.
Yep.
For example, there's property now that is zoned industrial that's being used for agricultural purposes, and it's taxed at the agricultural rate.
Yeah.
Same thing, a subdivision that's sold, until the lots are actually sold, they're still taxed at the old rate instead of a lot rate.
Okay.
So it doesn't get hurt on that.
And even then, that's where we wanted the square footage within the fence, so that the assessor's office could say,
Yeah,
out of this acre, I'm making something up, 0.9 acres is used for whatever, and 1.1 is used for ag or whatever.
So I have a question. If some, I don't know about other counties changing their to solar, but who would determine where those goes? Because really, a solar company is gonna look where all our transmission lines are, our
They would-
switch yards. I mean, so are they gonna say?
The applicant would
The applicant.
request, just like the applicant
They would,
requests a new
yeah.
subdivision, or, you know what I
So
mean,
they're gonna ask
requests
for
a
zoning.
zoning.
And then,
Well, that would be the end of that process, would be the zone change, so they go to planning commission, and then commissioners, and that would be the end of that process.
but then you have to change it back to ag or whatever if it didn't work, so.
Correct, sometimes in those, we'll go ahead and throw some of the ag uses in that district too, just so that you can still farm it, and you know what I mean? Do some of those things, because that makes sense.
we could have a few further discussions. I'd be more comfortable making a final decision on that when Commissioner Bramer is present and so forth, but, I think we've all got a pretty good idea on that.
I just, ag, I'm putting revisit to that
Okay.
thing. Okay, so then the next topic, number 13, was battery energy storage systems, or BESS. And so one thing that we did add in here is a definition, now that we're breaking some of these things out, I wanted to make sure we had a private, utility facility in here. So this is non-solar, non-BESS. It's, it could be any of those other private utility facilities. To go ahead and break those out, so we added a definition for that it's a facility or use that's located on an individual parcel outside of the right of way, operated by a utility that is not under the jurisdiction or regulation of the IURC, and where it's not defined separately in this UDO. So it's not including commercial solar, BESS, or wind, commercial wind. And does not include public utilities regulated by the IURC or installation of cables, lines, or similar utilities for home or individual service. So like your Comcast cable, that's not worth going here. So what we're looking at here, this does include a new definition for BESS though. So again, that's one or more of the devices assembled together, capable of producing and storing energy, or capable of storing energy, excuse me, in order to supply electrical, energy at future time. Does not include the standalone 12-volt car battery or an electric motor vehicle. So it is divided into a tier 1 and a tier 2. So the intention with the tier 1 is its capacity is less than or equal to 600 kilowatt hours. So this is again, and then tier 2 is greater than that. The idea between those, that tier 1 is typically what you might use for your home backup or again, smaller systems. And that threshold, those thresholds are not made up by us. That's made up by other national codes. So it references National Fire Protection Association, and the National Fire Code. So that's kind of the 2 tiers on that. So when you think of the 600 or above, that's the bigger ones that you see usually in the containers and that sort of thing. Below 600, it might be what you have for your electric vehicle at home or for, you know, some other device like that at home, a home or, you know, they probably have something similar in this building, I'm gonna guess, just because it's EMA. Again, for that on site. So it is looking at including these items. Tier 1 BESS would be permitted in all districts. So again, if you want that small scale, that's permitted. But the tier 2 would be a special exception. And we initially had put ag in that one, I1, I2, based on discussions last time. I've struck the ag and just said I1, I2. So that would require, again, say it is BESS out in the county, it would have a spot of industrial. In my mind, the difference here is you're usually looking at 5, 10, maybe, you know, ish acres. You're not looking at putting zeros behind those numbers. You're not looking at 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 or, you know what I mean? You're looking at a much smaller area. And then it added the gray that private utility facility should be a special exception in ag, I1 and I2, and left ag in that one because there are going to be some private utilities that you might need to look at, but it still has a process for that. I think that's the end of that. What are some thoughts on that? The definitions, I guess. Are there any questions on the definitions first? That's maybe an easier one to talk through first.
The definitions look pretty good.
Could you give me an example of a private utility?
Yeah, so Comcast might have some sort of utility facility, or is Comcast even around anymore? Spectrum, they're Spectrum now. So they could have, again, some sort of utility facility. You can have private companies that serve those utilities too. Again, what capacity varies, but most of them, if they're not regulated by the IURC or opting out, I mean, some of our public utilities really are not regulated by the IURC. So municipal sewer districts can opt out of that, and some of those in that nature. But it's going to be probably more like your phone, internet type of things in the county at the moment, because it doesn't include solar, wind, or BESS. I think just since we're starting to, it's just good to go ahead and put that in there.
Thanks.
Quick question, what are, like switch yards, currently the transmission lines and switch yards that come through the hilltop? What is the zoning on those typically?
I don't know if they are, or they are, but are they?
No, they're not even subject to zoning.
Are they URC?
They're URC. We don't have any private switch.
So they're a public utility,
They're a
we
public
say.
utility.
Right, but they're in our farm, they're in the farmland is where it is.
They're all
Because
over.
they
They're
go
in farmland, they're in residential land.
Across the.
Right, but the
They're-
large switch yards are
Yes.
not typically in, a residential area, they're.
Yeah, you're talking like
There's some fairly good
substations
sized
too.
ones right in Hanover by the, trailer park and off Madison Avenue. There's one, there's another one near the golf
A
course.
substation, like more substation, yeah.
Fairly good sized substation area.
I guess I'm thinking the one like Jefferson, the one that just comes up off the plant is huge,
Yeah, that's up on top on,
but
that's
we used
out.
to farm around it.
Yeah,
So some REMCs come opt out of IURC from my understanding too, so it could be if your REMC opted out, that would then be considered a private utility. So it's not dealing with the public utilities though, just the private.
yeah, because if they go into the public utility, we have no say on the zoning side of it.
Right.
Any questions then on the use, districts? On this? Okay, So then if we move to 14, there, 14 was looking at, it'll be, it's faded my hair, setbacks. From non-participating parcels. So, you'll see in just the rationale there, an additional suggestion was made at the last meeting to include minimum separation between projects or uses. So I put something in at the bottom of 12 that we'll highlight we can get to here. But basically the thoughts on this one are the proposed, potential amendments. So we're looking at commercial SES setbacks. And so from non-participating or from participating parcels, there's no setback. So farmer A and farmer B, or farm A and farm B are both participating, you don't have to have setbacks between those. Let's maximize those, spaces. And it does say note that all non-commercial SES structures on a participating parcel, such as a house, with, a parcel on it or commercial SES and a house on it, still have to meet those zoning district requirements. So yes, the commercial solar has no setbacks, but if you have other uses, you do need to meet your setbacks on that. I just tried to clarify on that. And then setbacks from non-participating parcels, so that's, parcel A is gonna have proposed for solar, and parcel B is not participating in that solar, application. So, again, these are all up for debate, and this was based on some feedback I've gotten with you guys previously, but if you have a parcel without an existing dwelling that is not residentially zoned and not platted for residential development, the minimum setback for commercial solar structures shall be 100 feet and 50 feet for the fencing. It's measured from the non-participating property line. So parcel A is gonna have solar, parcel B does not have solar, it's not residential, and it's not residentially zoned and not platted for residential. The fence has to be at least 50 feet back, and then the solar structures have to be at least 100 feet back from their property line. Again, they might actually set their fence back at 90 feet or 80 feet, or you know what I mean? That's just the minimum. From a parcel with an existing dwelling, then the structures have to be set back 250 feet from the closest edge of the dwelling. So I've got a house, go to the closest edge, and I go back 250 feet. But it still cannot be less than that 100 feet, right? It's always got to be the 100 feet. And then the minimum setback for the fencing, again, has to be at least 50 feet. There is an option there that we had kind of discussed. It said you could look at setbacks, maybe a tiered setback if it has one sided solar versus 2 or 3 or 4. And then the residential parcel without an existing dwelling. So these are things that are just zoned residential or platted for residential, but there's not a house there yet, right? So the minimum setback should be 150 feet for the solar structures and 50 feet for the fencing, and that's measured from the property line because there's no house to measure from. So it gave you an extra 50 feet basically, not knowing where that house, there's no house there today. Do you want me to run through all of these and then we circle
let's have
back
some
to you, or you want to
discussion
stop
on-
right
let's
here?
stop
Like this
right
was
here
the one
and go.
chunk of
Yeah, especially on the residential one.
Yeah. So if you want to take them piece by piece,
Let's take the
non-residential.
non-residential first.
Okay. So right now it's saying it's 100 feet for the structures, 50 foot for the fence. Again, the solar company might very well set their fence closer to their structures, but that's fine.
I get confused on the non-residential and residential because, again, I'm thinking ag.
Great.
Because the way the UDO is set up in an ag district, the permitted use is homesteading.
Yeah.
So
Which is
this-
farming out.
So this says, where'd it go? Somewhere.
Not residentially zoned. is what
Yes,
you're
thank
getting.
you. And not that.
And we can specify that as R1, 2, I'll get your Rs correct, the R districts. The intent there is, you can definitely, you might have a parcel zoned ag, but it is just literally a farm, right? It has no dwelling. Could it have a dwelling in the future? Yeah, potentially, but it is just a farm. And so it's not including, this is not including those, that would fall under the non-residential then, because it doesn't have a dwelling. And we can specify R1, R2, is it 1, 2, 3? Without looking at it.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so.
R1, 2, 3, we can specify that.
Specify
So-
that as,
That is not zoned, so we, on non-residential, we can say for any parcel without an existing dwelling that is not zoned R1, R2, or R3 and is not platted for residential development, because you can have a plat and ag. So we can definitely put R1, 2, and 3 in there to just specify.
and I just get hung up on that, it's not residentially zoned, because in my mind, like you said, it is just a large, I mean, just a piece of ground that's being farmed, but there's nothing stopping anybody putting a house on it because it's zoned homestead residential.
Yeah, and under the ordinance, I think if you have, categories, so it's residential districts and it lists them, and it's business, maybe business or commercial districts, and it lists them industrial districts, and list those. So yeah, either way, we definitely can specify. Right now, then it would read that is not zoned R1, 2, or 3.
Right, I
And so,
understand
yeah,
that, but
and
think
then,
of it as ag.
yes,
So
then the
this-
debate is, what do you want it to be?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the debate, I think, is what do you want it to be from those ag parcels that don't have a house, but could have a house, that's.
Yes, because I
What should it be?
was, I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
So if solar went in, somebody decided to put a house on here, then they're gonna have to meet the setbacks for coming to get a variance.
The house
Because-
won't have to meet the setbacks, it's the solar that has to.
But if you put a house there, then it's not gonna meet those setbacks, because it's already been established.
Right, but it's coming in after, so it
That'd be
wouldn't,
their choice.
yeah, that's their choice then, that's not an issue then.
They would
It's
know
coming
at
in
that
after.
time. It wouldn't be like you got an existing house there and you have solar that moves in on you. Before you ever purchased the lot or decided to build the
You'd
house
see
on
the
the lot, you would know that there was already solar in that location. So your house would not have to, it would just have to meet the standard setback from the property line
Right.
that you meet for a house in that
But then you could
district.
run into what Dave's talking about eventually with that problem, that the other county was talking about. With the houses that they had with solars.
No, that was where there
That
was
was
a
staging.
staging area where they had that.
Yeah,
I guess my thought is if you have number 2 talks about existing dwelling, and my thought process is in a land that's being farmed that doesn't have a house on it, but could any day have a house on it, to me, that is, I think those setbacks should be different, but.
and if that's what, again, this is up for you guys to debate, if you wanna include ag, R1, R2, R3, that's, you can include whatever you'd like. Or make them one setback if it's, you know what I mean, the 100 can be whatever you'd like it to. But if you wanna include ag in there, that's fine too, it's up to you guys, again. I see where you're going with that, like,
I
that
just
you
get
can have a
confused
house,
on the language, because I just.
potentially.
Yeah, just.
And I think the basis for that was more of, well, there's not a house there today and it's not set up to necessarily, you know what I mean? Be
Yeah.
that use and that use alone, like a residential district would be. And so,
Yeah, I guess I see it as not platted for, well, I see it as not allowed. I'm like, well, it is allowed, a house is allowed on there. That's what I'm getting hung up on, that's all.
Well, I guess if you look at the value of the lot too, if you've got solar panels already sitting there within 100 feet of where they could build a house, that's gonna certainly lessen the price of that lot.
and so it's like a number 1, if you wanted to say not zoned ag, R1, R2, R3, you could add ag to that too. It's whatever you want.
But these people already know that there's a solar panel there, so they visually can see it, so
That's the
it
theory
would be
behind
their
it.
choice, whether they build there or not.
But again, you're gonna reduce the price of
You're
the property.
And if they already own the land.
Right.
Right, but there's a lot of land that I don't ever want to build a house on. I mean, honestly, it's like,
Well, the vast majority of it's not going to have houses built on it, we're looking at on.
And so, again, if you
And
wanna
it's
add
not
ag
going
up to
to-
that list.
It's not
of
going to
ours,
lower the
that's
value
fine, too.
we just
for
make
ag
the setbacks
purposes.
bigger.
Or you can do that.
Would you make them like 200 feet? Is that unreasonable?
I'm sorry, what?
Why wouldn't we just make our setbacks bigger? You know, like 200, maybe 200 feet.
The only thing that happens, we start making setbacks so big, you end up with a lot of wasted land, basically. You've got land that somebody's gonna have to try to keep it mowed outside of the fence, and, if it grows up in weeds, it's a bigger problem than if it's a smaller setback and it's maintaining panels on the other side.
The only thing I see on, I'm more on the, as I listened to all that was brought to us at the BZA and the concerns at other counties, it was mainly on the existing houses to the proposed solar panels. And the main thing was how close with our setbacks.
Correct. And that's why I separated
So,
residential versus.
You know, my biggest thing was listening to all that is I think the setbacks, even at 250 feet, is way too close to existing residents.
Right.
I think, to be honest, and you can shoot me down on this, and I'd understand, but I think it ought to be 1,000 feet.
Yes.
From an existing house. Now, this other part, I don't know if those really need to be extended too much, if it's just, like you used the example, Farm A and Farm B, and they're both just tillable acres or woods. And I don't know how, you know, I think if the solar comes in on A, that setback could be where it is possibly. But my main concern is the existing residents. And we do have setbacks of 1,000 feet in our ordinances already. And that's where I would be, from the closest corner to the property would be 1,000 feet is what my recommendation.
Not the dwelling, the parcel.
Of the dwelling. 1,000 feet from the dwelling.
From the dwelling, right? So if you're on, I'm gonna make up a 500 acre right lot, and you're way back there, it still 1,000 feet might not even get you off your property.
Yeah.
But
If you're up against it,
100 feet,
that's
then
visual and
it's gonna impact it differently.
it definitely impact what your expectations of living in an ag district. Once again, I don't believe this is ag oriented. This is in light industrial in my mind. But I think you have certain expectations when you live out in the country. You might see a barn go up, or you might deal with other things, but when you don't expect a solar field.
So on, you're saying on number 2, which is existing residential dwellings, it's, again, existing, it's an existing house that's there today. You're saying you want to say that the structure shall be 1,000 feet from the closest edge of that existing dwelling. Right? Just
So
make
if the
sure.
house is there, the solar place is in A,
Yeah.
and that you're in B, your house is there, and A comes in, they want to put solar, they have to be 1,000 feet from you,
From you, right? So is that,
the panels.
what is the committee?
Should we put on there that it is a permanent structure?
From the property line.
Well, it's a dwelling. A dwelling is a permanent.
Well, but you think about house trailers move in and out, and you know what I mean, they're not.
It's still considered dwelling.
Yeah, that's still considered, because it's-
I just don't want people
On a
to
permanent
draw their
foundation.
house trailers in. Something like that, just because, you know.
Once the applicant applies, even if you want to put a trailer in there real quick, the applicant was in there before you.
So.
The application
Yeah, and then,
was in before you, so unless you catch wind of it, I guess before the applicant actually puts it in there, then you could probably do something like that, what you're concerned with,
but if
but,
they already have a dwelling on that parcel, you can't do that.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's whatever you guys discuss, but that's just, when we were listening, that was a really big concern of the people, not only in our county, but other counties.
I'm looking at you guys for direction. I'm not making,
What
that's
if,
not my decision.
what if you did 1,000 feet from the property line and not the panels or at, if you can't do a property line, could you do the fence 1,000 feet?
Well, the area that you run into problems is when you start putting it for property line. We had a history in the past. There's quite a bit of property in the county, for example, that they divided it up at one time. You had to have like 5 acres if you were gonna have a septic system on it. So we've got these areas where they did an acre wide and 5 acres deep. And all they've ever done is build a house out here on the front acre of it. And that's all they're ever going to do. They've got all this that sets behind them. So if you put it from the property line, you may end up having a requirement that's 1,750 or almost 2,000 feet from the actual house. You know, someone out here in the country that has 10 acres and they have their house up here on the road frontage of it, and 4 acres is behind the house. Are you wanting to push the solar that far back from the property line versus making it from the house?
One suggestion is why are we looking at those setbacks? What is it interest to not only the property values, health, safety, well-being, and agricultural practices in general? There was some evidence discussed regarding the EMFs from the solar fields, depending upon the size of those fields, when we're looking at setbacks, to consider why we are implementing those setbacks.
Well, we're implementing the setbacks not to have the impact on an existing home. It's the main reason for that.
Okay, so there
And
was.
it would take, I don't know enough about the health and safety on the EMF, but from what I have read and so forth, that diminishes very quickly with distance, and what you're dealing with the EMF at the solar panels level is extremely low. You'd have more of that when you got into the high voltage transmission and the substations and so forth. So on the panel areas, I don't see that as a big consideration on this setback. Talk to us.
This one, it's probably the bigger.
I like
The harder
1,000 feet by the for the dwelling, or, because it.
I like it from the property line. That protects my property, even if I have 5 acres behind my house. That's still protecting my property, because then you're not having an industrial location right on my fence line, because my house is on the other side of my property. But the industrial location is.
I see what you're saying, but then if you look at it from the landowner, the other landowner's side, you're restricting what they can do with their land because of the setbacks.
They can put pollinators out, like, they wanna go green.
But we don't wanna put something in place that's gonna get us too much land that's not utilized or valuable to anybody, for that standpoint. The dwelling too, you've got the noise and stuff, and they said the further you're away. I like I can see everybody's point, of course. We sat through this with the BZA and, but you gotta protect you can't penalize. It's it's all about property rights, and you as a resident, as B has a property right just as much as A, and you kind of have to, it's a hard thing to weigh. I mean, and it just makes it hard. That's why I think that your main concern ought to be the people living in the house and making sure they're being, because they're there every day. The value, you only sell it every, however long you want. But when you buy a house, you're hopefully gonna live there for a while. And you wanna make sure you can live there and not be just looking at a solar panel.
I'll also throw it out there real quick though, with any BZA decision, not just solar, any BZA decision, BZA may put reasonable conditions on any approval that they do have. So if there is that one little nuance, you know what I mean, like odd thing that's gonna happen in one place in the county. Again, when we start to talk later about making them at least look at every parcel, they can put reasonable conditions that are above and beyond. We're setting the minimum here so that they don't have to set those minimums during that process, but.
Yes,
I have a question. If I'm landowner A, I'm not participating. Landowner B is participating. I have the right to subdivide my property like 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road to give a parcel to a child who's now grown, got married, wants a house. What do I do? Because now I can't give them my property that I have rights to because I don't meet the setbacks.
it would not
Somebody else
affect, it
says.
wouldn't affect your setbacks.
Yeah, these only apply to
would not affect-
the solar
it would not
portion.
affect
It
for-
does
No,
not
but
apply.
that's what I'm saying. If you box in with solar and I've still got this property that I want to put a house on because I have the right to subdivide it, but I can't put a house there because I can't get the 1,000 feet from.
No,
the
You
solar
wouldn't,
panel.
you wouldn't have to have that 1,000 feet. It doesn't work that direction. You could, even if it says it's 1,000 feet from an existing house, if you subdivide that property later, you could build a house as long as it meets the setbacks that we have in place for a house from a
It's like
property line.
20 feet or something.
It makes no difference that solar is over on the other side of that.
And
You're
I'll,
not having to stay away from the solar to protect the solar. The idea is to keep the solar away from you to protect the house that was already there.
and I'll
And you would-
But the
specify,
house that I'm building may not have that protection because
But then you, right, I understand, but you would have been choosing to build the house there knowing that the solar was in place.
if these only apply to the solar facility, they don't know, it's not a reverse. It's kind of like our buffer yards or something like that.
But they're bringing in the nuisance instead of, yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah, so they're hindering what I can do with my property.
We also have something at the end of this section, we also have one in here that, again, setbacks can be waived if there's a mutual agreement. So if A has a solar, you said A doesn't have a solar, B has a solar, and A is like, I don't care, it doesn't matter. They can waive those. So again, that's where, if you don't care, then that's a different story, right? But all those property, if you and your spouse own the property, you both have to sign that waiver, right? Can't sign for him.
And if there's a mortgage on it, the mortgage fee
Right.
probably would have to sign too.
It's whoever has that ownership of it, yes, but you can waive it, again, that's up to you guys. Each property owner, that's their own, that's between them. Okay, so where do you guys want to?
Yes,
I think that we should include, churches and schools in that, because they don't technically consider it a dwelling, but I feel like that those should be included. Because we don't want one, I don't think a school should have one that's.
I agree with that.
And several other UDOs do that.
Okay. I'm gonna add that, dwelling, existing dwellings, church and school.
Or,
Just,
yeah.
okay.
yes,
Cemeteries. I'm the manager of the cemetery and, we got 606 residents and another 145 property owners.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's a kind of a sore subject for me at this point in time. Along with, I still think it should be from the property line instead of a dwelling, but
I think if we're going to make it from the
Cemetery.
property line, we need to drop the footage down. And then,
If you drop the footage down, then that lets them put it right up against your house.
That's right.
well, I'm not talking about dropping it clear down to where we're at, but something different than 1,000. You know, yes.
I just have a question about if you meet 1,000-foot setback from an existing house and say that lot is really deep, right? And so that 1,000 feet doesn't touch the end of the lot. That solar project still has to meet a 200-foot setback from that parcel line in addition to the 1,000-foot.
Right now it was 100.
Oh, 100, okay.
100.
But so there is setbacks
There's
from the
always
parcel
a
line in
setback,
addition
right.
to the
Yes,
1,000-foot.
that's correct.
Even if, yeah, you're on the joint parcel, you're still always gonna have to be at least that 100 foot.
Yeah.
Is what it's written down right now, but there's somebody in the corner, they had their hand up.
Yes,
Off what she was saying, these projects are so long-term. So if it is not from a property line and you do own, say, 40 acres and you decide that you can never make a choice for the future of your property if solar is butted up next to you. It's because it's not building a barn, it's not the neighbor building a house, this is an industrial situation. So I just feel like that should be considered in this because it is everybody's right to their property, but this is not a short-term situation, this is long-term, and if you do own more than 5 acres, then you have quite a bit of property that you may want to, or your kids may want to do something with in the future, and you've restricted that for everybody from here on out if the right boundaries aren't set in place.
I'll throw this out to the committee real quick, just as a distinguishing thing. Do you wanna treat, like you're saying, existing residential the same as ag? but without a residence on it? I think that's a fundamental question. Do you wanna treat those the same or differently?
You mean zone residential?
Yes, so if
You mean
it's zone
let's say-
residential
say
or has an
residential,
existing
let's say
dwelling.
R1, R2, R3.
R1, R2, R3, or has a dwelling. It could be zoned anything and have a dwelling. Do you wanna treat that differently in terms of setbacks from just an ag parcel without a dwelling? That's the first question, I think, so I can get that. Do you wanna treat those differently?
Yes, I believe that R1, R2, and R3,
Plus, or an
our
existing,
existing dwelling needs to be treated different
Than ag.
than ag, yes.
okay, that's the first distinction in there. And we'll put churches and schools in there too, but, okay, so if there is a distinction, then.
Cemeteries.
And yeah, do you guys wanna add cemeteries to one or the other? I don't know which one.
Do we have a different setback for cemeteries?
Yeah.
I mean, not 1,000 feet. I don't know how you guys
So
do
then,
cemeteries.
if we're gonna treat those differently, I think you start with the biggest. If it is zoned R1, R2, or R3, or it has an existing dwelling, what do you want that setback to be? Like, you know what I mean, because we're gonna treat that, and then we'll go to the ag, it might be we can talk about that setback. And are we using the property line, or are we using the or the dwelling itself? That makes
I think it
sense?
needs to be,
I believe if you're going to do that, it would be simplify it just to make it part of the property line and come up.
All
with-
around.
Yes, all around,
Okay.
and come up with a distance that we're comfortable with on the property line.
Okay, so if it has a dwelling on it, or it is zoned R1, 2, 3,
But I believe that probably should be less than 1,000
okay,
foot.
what should that be? I'll throw that, I'm trying to at least just kind of direct us. You guys fill in the numbers, but at least trying to get us through you know what I mean? We'll talk about ag zones in a minute, then, just.
I think
zone-
it still needs to be the focus of protecting the value of that
Yeah,
home, lot.
So what should it-
residential, whatever.
what is that number then? From the property line, you're saying?
1,000 feet should be.
Yeah, has a house on it.
Wasted space.
That's one
Said,
wasted
I mean, that's a lot of.
I don't have the magic number.
farm that wasted space if there's enough of it.
That's right.
It has to be climate.
What is it?
It's all over the board, and that's why I say I don't have a magic number for you, or would have already given that to you. I think I put in what I think is probably more towards like, again, more commonly seen,
Are you
but you
comfortable
also
with
have a number of them that go
500 property
higher.
line,
Not as
500,
many go less.
750?
What's a visual of 1,000 feet? Like, is that a football field?
1,000 feet, or you got 5,000 what, and some odd is a mile.
5280 is a mile.
Yeah, so you're looking at a fifth of a mile, so
So,
that would
roughly
be
three
almost
football
1,000 feet.
Yeah, a little over
Really.
football fields. So roughly like we could do some math.
3 football fields.
Yeah.
It would
Oh,
be
yeah.
3 football fields.
Yeah, a little over 3 football.
That is a
3
lot.
football
The
fields.
long way of the football field, not the short way, the long. The long way.
I mean, I have one comment, which is that if it's 1,000 feet from a parcel line or any giant distance like that, you essentially then encourage a project to spread out over more properties in order to obtain the same goal. So that's just something to
Spread out or clustered together is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Sort of like an industrial, you like an industrial park to stay close together instead of spreading out over hundreds of acres. I guess rather than close together.
So we're talking, has a dwelling or zoned R1, 2, or 3, we're heading back from the property.
Acreage. That's a key thing right there. We don't want thousands of acres
And we'll-
into that.
We have a
That
separate
one
discussion
where
on that.
we can discuss in a bit, but so if we do have it, a house, existing house or zoned R1, 2, 3, or a parcel with a church or school, what is our setback we're doing from the property line, so what is our setback?
An existing cemetery, we might as well put the cemetery right in the same total with them. You just get one setback in on it.
Alright, so what is our numbers? You guys are throwing out 1,000 from the property line, somebody else said something that was a lot less than that, I don't have the magic number for you, this is not, again, was initially thrown out as probably what I would say is a good, you were when I headed a minimum like 250. I would probably go less than that, so you guys can tell me what it is, then I don't wanna throw that number out. This is a personal, this is a local decision, it's not a,
Can we come back to these
Yeah.
when we decide if it's gonna go in ag? We're gonna leave it in ag, or if we're gonna do, I mean, we're gonna have that discussion later,
It's-
right?
but
So we can
regardless
look
of that,
into these a little bit
even
more.
if you say it only can go in industrial or some sort of,
You got the
energy
same
district,
question.
it's gonna be the same
It's
question.
gonna be the same question.
Cause it's not like it's just gonna not go in, but they're still gonna wanna go in the same
So if you
place.
put the fence of 150 feet back from property lines, the solar panels 1,000 feet from houses, or
They're gonna move their fence back, but yeah.
they would move the fence
Yeah, oh
back.
yeah, they don't wanna maintain all that area. The solar company won't, they'll leave that on the property owner. to
Well, I know
maintain.
some people put like goats and things in there that would
They'd
maintain
still
that
push
as
that
far,
fence back.
as the farming
I
part
mean,
of it.
yeah, that fence will then be pushed back too, so. If you're going that far, I don't think it matters where the fence, you know what I mean? They're gonna,
do like 1,000 from the dwelling and 500 from the property line? To protect any future or something, doesn't have to, future people's value for the.
I
future.
think that's a good suggestion, that we do but then we'd be treating it with, we'll have two different things.
that's
The
But, okay,
existing back
so
where you were to start.
a
with.
dwelling,
That's probably a good solution.
the what's proposed, the dwelling is 1,000 feet from the structure.
And 500 feet.
Well,
Property
not
line
just
on
a
property
structure.
that's zoned R1, R2, 3, or.
Right.
Yeah.
Or all those other things.
And I think we also should define cemetery, because we have cemeteries on our farm
dwelling
that,
structure, yeah.
or farms, and there's 2 or 3 graves here, and they're technically cemeteries. But no one even knows they're there, other than we drive around them. So I think
Is there,
maintain.
I was gonna say, isn't there some kind of, because there's a lot of abandoned cemeteries, and I think that's what you're.
Yeah, we'll need to define, cause I think the way we probably define cemetery is like basically anywhere there's somebody
It's gotta be
buried.
attended to, somebody's gotta be, I don't know,
Maintain.
yeah,
I'm
but
gonna
I
put it
know
in
there's. a
quotes
lot
right now,
of-
it's not like my grandpa's farm had a couple hundred acres and there were 3 burial plots. You know what I mean? I'll do it to actual,
Find a definition.
what we typically would think of right now as a cemetery. So right now what I have, I'm just trying to get us at least, consensus here. If it has a dwelling, it's 1,000 feet from the dwelling, closest edge of that dwelling, but still can't be within the 500 feet. If it's zoned R1, 2, 3, if it has a church, a school, or a maintained
An active,
cemetery,
Yeah,
it's 500 feet from the property line. Is that right?
Say it again, sorry.
yeah,
So a dwelling, an existing dwelling, what you guys have proposed is 1,000 feet from that, at closest edge of that dwelling, right? So 1,000 feet back. But still has to maintain the 500 foot setback from the property line. If it's zoned R1, 2, 3, it's a church, a school, or a official cemetery, like a actual cemetery as we think of today. It's just a 500, it then is a 500 foot setback from the property line. If it is, again, participating, there's no setback.
But an existing home that's on property that's ag, you would
That-
only be 1,000 foot from the existing home, not from the property line.
Right,
not
1,000
500.
feet from the home is what you guys
You're
are saying, but still maintaining at least 500 feet.
Mhm.
So now the ag zoned,
But you
Parcels.
wouldn't have to meet 500 feet from the property line of that, that. On top of that, like it's own
it's
ag.
not in addition, so let's say if, parcel here and parcel here, right?
Mhm.
And my house is way over here, so 1,000 feet only gets me 100 feet into the solar parcel.
Mhm.
They still have to be 500. But if my house is right over here, 1,000 feet might get me 900 feet into their parcel. Does that make sense? So, from based on what you guys are saying, trying to at least simplify this into something here so we can react to.
Correct, but what I'm saying is, your house is up in this corner.
Yeah.
And it's 1,000 feet back here to your back property
Yeah.
line. They don't have to be another 500 feet off of
Yeah,
it.
they do.
We're saying 500 feet off the property line. then.
Yes.
In
I'm-
addition to.
I don't think so. I think you'd only have to be either the 1,000 foot or the 500 from the.
Could we put and or?
No,
1,000
if
or
it's an
500?
existing home,
Yeah,
we want to be the 1,000 foot without any
Correct.
doubt about
but
that.
1,000 might not get you off your parcel, I think is what they're saying.
Right, I understand that, but if it, even if it doesn't get you off your parcel, they shouldn't have to be the 1,000 foot, then if your property extends 1,000 foot behind your house
Yeah.
and then extend another
What should it
500.
be?
Should it be the 100-foot setback that we have up in the
Yes, I think it should be
Okay.
that 100 foot setback that you have up there. And then, I mean, you're still pushing out, it's gonna be, from the house itself, you're gonna be 1,150 feet or whatever it is.
I might say match that distance to what you're gonna say next is the ag setback. Does that make sense? Like whatever you wanna set it back from a parcel that's ag that doesn't have a house on it today, that's what that setback should be, because it would make
Yes,
sense.
I would agree with
Does
that.
that make, cause there's logic of, if you had that much land, you would do something with it, like somebody was saying, so. Let's circle that one just a second, but
Okay.
if it is an ag parcel then, without a house, what do you want that setback to be? So I would say you're going from the property line. Is it, again, numbers that I'm throwing, you just said 100, somebody said 500 from the property line of the R's. What do you guys want it to be?
But if it's zoned ag.
It's zoned ag without a dwelling
Yeah,
today.
so
It's kind of playing at what, the ladies in the back were.
are we comfortable with like 200 feet? I think 100, I mean, is close to it, a non-participating.
So
farm.
that's not liberal, I'm hearing more than 100.
So you're comfortable with 200?
I am, I don't know about age, and you guys know.
They we're on how far from ag property without an existing home on it?
Ag without a home, how far should it be set back?
Non-participating.
Non-participating.
Where do you guys want that? I don't know if you were, R1, 2, 3, church, school, cemetery, that's a 500 from the property line. So the next question was then ag without a dwelling. You guys tell me what that number is.
So I suggested 200. Right now we're at 100, but I think 100 is close.
Yeah.
200.
What?
Fine. 200.
So I have a farm and I'm non-participating, and the farm next to me is solar. And so you're saying 200 feet from
Your property line.
Your
my
property
property
line.
line to what? Their fence, their panel?
We're talking about their panels here.
Because their fence will only be close, they determine really how close, I mean.
I
if
mean,
it's
I'm
to
gonna
like
guess that you're
75
putting on
feet,
us at 20, maybe 30 feet.
I mean, usually, then you have a landscape buffer. in
Yeah.
front of the
Yeah.
fence.
And you don't want us set at 50 feet because there's there's a space they don't need. So 20,
You're gonna be closer to the panels with the fence.
yeah,
right?
you wanna keep that as tight as
Awesome.
possible. So I think here we're talking about panels and then we can maybe adjust the fence 20 or 30 feet.
On their application, they proposed 300 feet, so why don't we?
300 from existing homes,
This is what the-
300 feet from existing homes.
Yeah.
Now we're at 1,000.
Or was it?
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with the 200 feet. I think that
From the
that's
property.
getting it from the
Because
property.
I think you've already taken up so much land with 1,000 feet.
Yes,
That
very
it's really
existing
overwhelming.
And then you're gonna put that, carry that.
So then that would be, yeah. So right now what's proposed, I'll repeat it once.
Yeah.
What's this group here is starting to propose. An existing dwelling is 1,000 feet from the closest edge of that structure, but it still can't be less than 200 feet from the property line, right? So you're in the back 40, you might be 200 feet. Zoned R1, R2, R3, a church, a school, or a cemetery is 500 feet from the property line. Ag without a dwelling, or other districts too, I guess, we can talk about those in a second. Ag without a dwelling is 200 feet from the property line. Do you wanna include all other zoning districts in there too? I guess.
I think schools need to be further than that. I mean, some of them have 1,000 feet from a school. Or 12,000, I'm sorry, 12,000 feet from a school. So we're not being,
It's like a couple.
1,000 feet is not crazy. I mean, this is where children, we don't know the long term of living near a solar farm. I mean, do we want to expose our children that go to school every day next to the solar farm? We don't know long term exposure.
I was asking, I don't, off the top of my head, I couldn't point out where all the schools are.
But I don't think we really have much in the county existing school-wise that would even come into play. You know, you have deputy and
They've really pushed with Southwestern School, just putting that out there, the solar company that's a part,
And
so.
it's not just this area, it could be anywhere, so what if it was
Right, but sold the
Canaan?
school.
What happens if later we have to build another school somewhere? I mean, did it cover, I'm just,
Right.
if it's not an issue now, then why not put it in there?
Well, if the school isn't there now, it isn't gonna have
No,
any
but
effect.
this
on
is
what's gonna
gonna,
go in
I
the
mean, this
future.
isn't gonna, you don't want to change this again in 5 years, 10 years.
You wouldn't be changing it again. They
That's
would-
what I'm
they
saying,
would
when
be
you build and
picking
have
up.
to build another school, at least that
Right.
school will already be protected.
Well, where they build the school, they would pick an area that had whatever protections they wanted.
You say if solar is already in.
I'm saying if solar's not in yet, this
Oh,
is later down the line, if the solar company comes in, that's what I'm saying later, yeah.
Okay, I understand.
I
So,
understand, yeah.
To make that a requirement.
okay. So where do you guys want me to go?
I'm worried about running out of land, and you wanted it to be just a single project, but honestly, any project that is presented from here on out could be across the entire county. So if we had one smaller solar lot so that we could protect everybody in the county's property, which we're talking about basically ag land here. So Canaan, Deputy, DuPont, not just Saluda Township. Are the restrictions from property lines valued? You say that it's taken away all the land, but it's also saving the land for the other people that are non-participants. Or how are we gonna grow? These are 50-year projects, basically. So that stipends the entire county to grow anywhere that these are going in, unless we are giving buffers to the non-participants. And if it's multiple smaller solar projects, then that kind of shares the wealth with everybody in the county to enjoy them, not just one community to be inundated with them.
I understand what you're saying, but also I'm just looking at it from a business point of view. They're gonna go next to switch yards, transmission lines. There aren't very many out in Canaan, and they would be hard to put solar panels in Canaan just because of topography. Whereas, Highway 7 area where we live is extremely flat, Saluda's flat. So that's the lands they're looking at. But I get what you're saying, and actually I'm thinking to myself, wouldn't it be great if we all had a little bit of solar panel everywhere? We'd all have a tax benefit, but it's probably not.
But those of us who live in the places where you're saying are the high demand and have to be neighbors with those, we would like our property to also be valued so that we can continue to live there.
Right. I understand that. Not without the same thing. I understand. We have our categories maybe. So can we discuss also like when a property or a home is bordered by 3 sides, so they're gonna go 1,000 feet off of each side of
Whatever
that
the closest,
property.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, the closest edge of that. Kind of what is also worked into the conversation, it's the gray one, that this is what you guys had to be added last time, was a setback between different solar projects. So, what was suggested was that each of the solar projects, so you have different project owners, there would be, the setback that was suggested was 1 mile between those. So that really starts to limit where they could go even, because 1 mile's, 52
Per
maybe
project or per parcel?
per project.
Per project?
Yes, so like a project is going to encompass multiple parcels. Because nature
Right,
of the
right, I
beast.
just want to make sure that.
Yes, it's per solar project, so. That was something put into the discussion, I don't know if that impacts or doesn't, but you guys are talking about using land and not using land and.
Per project doesn't give you individuals any rights, because like the Saluda project, if you use a project in almost thousands of acres, and these individuals that are in there,
Correct, it
they're
would
still
limit them.
locked in, they're still, they have no rights.
it would limit them from doing solar in the future, which again, talk about the good, bad of each thing. That's the downfall that would limit if your neighbor wanted to be, you know what I mean? Do that, it would limit it. That was put in based on what you guys had asked for last time. So,
Would that increase the number of switch yards needed and, those type of items needed if you did a lot of small ones? Would that, would it increase transmission, would it increase other things?
it's gonna, I think, spread them out, but also, you know, miles 50 to 80, it's over 5,000 feet, so it's a big distance, so that's up to you guys too.
Right, there's some counties that have limited size. A commercial is 75 to 400 acres, it's a commercial solar installation, and that's the cap. And then that has to be at least 3 miles from any other solar
Right.
installation of that size. They've done it that way as well.
So that could be kind of, yeah, putting that into the discussion.
I think you have to discuss size before you can discuss distance.
Okay.
Because
You wanna go there?
I just think if you're gonna, if you have like lady in the back said, a 4,000 acre one and you just wanna go a mile apart, that doesn't really give the residents there much that live in that mile area. But if you, but if it's
Separation,
on,
not setback, though,
Yeah.
not setback
Not setback,
between
but-
dwelling, but
but between
separation.
projects or what you're saying,
I agree with
But
you,
if-
if
if
it's a
you
small
go to
project.
small, you
separation.
got a maximum acreage of whatever
Right.
that is, then a mile makes a bigger difference, or 2 miles, or 3. But if we got large ones, so I think the discussion before we get into
We can
distance.
put a pin in
between
that one for a moment,
Yeah,
until we get to that.
And the other
Max
problem
size.
that comes in, that came to be evident during this last application that was considered by the BZA, is in that one, there was parcels in many different locations. And there were distinct differences between where those were located. And so when you evaluate them, it's different than a BZA normally looks at. Normally, you're looking at, you know, a few acres over here, or a couple hundred acres maximum, and
It's
one
contiguous
set of roads
usually.
and one set of conditions. And when you try to apply those set of conditions to 5, 6, 8 different areas, it becomes very difficult. And so I almost feel that anything that's not a contiguous area is a separate application as such. It's for you to evaluate what roads are by this one and what houses are here and what effects it has compared to another one over here that's 3 miles away. How do you do that?
And Warren and I did talk about that, was on one of these future ones, and my, the consideration of each parcel, my just suggestion back or concern is sitting in the staff perspective would
Yes.
be, and even the public's perspective, if you do that, do you want to have 15 public hearings? Like, do you want to do that thing 15 times? Do you want to have 15 different applications that you have to process and pull together and hopefully get staff reports or whatnot for 15 different set of findings? I'm just using the number 15 arbitrarily, but you know where I'm going. Or do you make it one application, one public hearing, but they look at each contiguous area in terms of making sure they're looking at it and they can put different conditions on a certain parcel or a certain contiguous area. So that was my only pushback.
Yes, I understand, I agree.
That sounds like a lot of, one of those public hearings is a big undertaking for the staff, for the BZA members, for the neighbors, for the applicant. Doing that like 15 times seems like I just wanna go crawl under a rock.
It may not be so bad, it might, would it be?
Well, I was just gonna say that the hard part is looking at everything as a whole. And because they are so different, like Warren's saying. And if we can look at them as individuals, I don't think it'll be as hard, even if we have to do it 3 or 4 different times or whatever, because of that. The hard part with this last one was everything was conceptual.
Right, and this is gonna have
And-
site plans
and-
now, so there's,
And everything, we need a checklist also that the applicant has to fill out. I mean, a detailed checklist would help us too, but the hard part is the amount of area at one time, and you gotta consider all those. And if we can look at everything in smaller segments, it's a little easier. And Jenny can.
I
tell
would
me
say
what
like, you
she
definitely need to
says,
look
but-
at them from a
That's my
BZA and
opinion.
discuss them in those smaller chunks. I was just saying, technically letting it be one application, one public hearing, even though you could say, so we do have 15 areas, right? Spread out just for,
Well, then you'd have to have,
then we could start to talk about each one of those areas and zoom into it for sure. Cause area one might be, I don't know, completely surrounded by, undeveloped areas and nobody's ever gonna see it, right? Versus area two might be next to your school, right? Or whatever it is. So zooming in and talking about those and discussing them at that level, I think is good. I would just be very nervous about making them technically separate applications.
well, you could make it one application and one hearing, but you'd have to have a separate findings on each contingent parcel group.
Yeah, we can get to like the logistics of it, like looking at, maybe your findings could even be overall, but you look at and say, are there any considerations for area one? Let's talk about what are those impacts or not in,
What do you think, Jenny? You were in this one.
yeah.
Also can put, we should put a cap on the amount of acreage that can be even put solar panels on, so that will limit how many meetings they have to do. You can only do 200 acre per application. I mean, and you put a cap of 2,000 acres on the whole county, then you're only looking at the, 10, yeah, I mean, it breaks it down a little bit.
Well, from our staff standpoint, I can tell you a smaller application would be welcome, because when you get binders like this, and you keep sending them out to, in fact, we got, I think, 2 complete different sets of binders. First one wasn't complete, second one was more complete, but had more stuff in it. And then by the time you add the consultant's information, which was also pretty voluminous, and then we had the rebuttal side, which I think was a binder about that big for the BZA. I mean, that's a lot of, if we could break it down, it would certainly help us from a volume standpoint, there's no question
I
about
mean,
that.
you also all just went through this, so you know what kind of staffing it takes and the energy and the time. Set an application fee that's gonna cover those.
And the fee
costs.
schedule is a discussion.
But I'm just saying, like, just set that, you know what I mean, kind of what you should,
Yeah.
figure out what it just costs to go through all that and set it from there.
It took, basically, it took a lot of Taylor's time, my time, and Josh's time to actually put the information together. Not only that, is get the information out to the BZA, because we had to make sure whatever we got in also went out to them. So as I got something, or Taylor got something, or Josh got something, we also then had to email it out to them. The email is wonderful. I mean, I hate to have the old mail system. I mean, that would take a lot of information. But we had a lot of good pro and con comments. I mean, we had both sides, and we had to get them out to everybody, which we did. But I'm not saying we can't do that, but it's certainly, as Warren was saying, it took quite a while.
From a
And-
staff standpoint, though, if you had 10 of those applications, you needed.
Well,
It gets very different. I'm sitting here, cause I
well,
think
no,
you're
as
saying too,
As
so.
David was saying, the problem was too, it was a conceptual plan. It wasn't a
And
final
we
plan.
taking care of
I think
that.
that's gonna, and we can say yes or no. Now we couldn't say yes or no to what was presented because it was conceptual. So, I mean, from that standpoint, we were guessing. I mean, and we basically just had to take the information and keep sending it out and inundate.
And I think we've
before we
solved,
did.
I think hopefully we solved that issue, but
Yeah.
in my mind, if I had 10 of those coming in at the same BZA meeting,
I wouldn't mind.
then what's gonna,
I wouldn't mind taking some.
in my mind might happen, again, I always just, it's coming totally from a staffing perspective. Resident A, right, is gonna send something against solar, resident B is gonna send something for solar. They're not gonna just probably send it for the one application, you're gonna get it 10 times.
But what's nice is.
And now
that-
it needs to go in 10 different
But we.
packets.
The area, let's say the area, gee, it's different. Like Warren said.
No, I agree with
one parcel here, one parcel here. They don't have the same conditions.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think, my vantage point, I think it'd be easier for David, that's what I'd say. Some of the 15 applications may get approved, some of them may not, depending on what the status is. And also, then you've got all the other ancillary agencies that come in and have to say, are there wetlands there? Are there woodlands there? Are there certain conditions there that would make it not suitable for solar? So I mean, yeah, to me, it makes sense, especially if we've got a fairly, I wouldn't say the whole county's homogeneous at all.
No, it's not, and I 100% agree with you, and that, what I was trying to propose was like a blending of both, letting it be one application that's saying each contiguous area of parcels, right, has to be considered and reviewed individually by the BZA, so it's one application, so when resident A and resident B send in their comments, they're sending in one comment, you're not making 10 copies of that, you know what I mean, for each of the applications. But they go through and they look at area one. What are any additional conditions, issues, you know, considerations on area one? Okay, read the document. What about area two? So it's forcing them to actually look at each of those, and then there might be some overarching ones, because it's, you know what I mean?
Do you approve each area individually, or do you?
You
approve-
could, that's up to you guys. I was more just pushing for one, I think application from a sanity standpoint for staff. I can't imagine getting 10 of everything.
I don't know, Ken, and that'd be a Pat question, because I don't know the answer, but Ken, if we have one applicant, but we have a large area, and you're saying look at it in areas or zones or whatever, if we do one findings of facts, I mean, can we make restrictions on just one area, or are we gonna say?
Yeah, I mean, you could do that today, any applicant, you could say we approve it except for it's not, you know, can't happen on parcel A, B,
But
or C.
we're doing the whole applicant, so if we're doing
No, you
findings
can make
of facts.
conditions independent of that, like, yeah. Now's my thought is like, you look at it and if there's just one area that needs a certain condition, you can put that condition on it, but we've zoomed into it, we've talked about that area in particular.
But what if they pick, one of the areas has a lot of residential, non-participant,
Yeah.
a lot of residential, and you
You could
You
say,
just say, we don't, but you can't say, well, your parcel, 500 acres, we don't want in the application, we're gonna, I mean.
you could say your approvals for this that excludes these parcels, I mean, you could do that today too. The applicant might not function with it, like, yeah, you know, I mean,
I don't wanna get
cause there's
set up for a
functional ways
lawsuit.
things are connected here, right? But, yeah, you can say that we're not going to approve parcels A, B, and C.
I think we set the fee so that we can, if we get 15 applications, we set the fee so that we can basically cover analysis of each one.
I think this use was different based on size. Again, if it was an acre, it would maybe be the same as a campground, you know, special exception or something. It's, the size is massive and that does require more. Again, one might have 300 adjoiners or 300 adjoiners is different than having 10 adjoiners. So there's more staff and we could talk about the fee, but
I think David's idea on, you gotta say, set the size, set a maximum size.
okay,
I like that.
we're bouncing around a little bit.
I'm on it.
I'm trying to, I was being nice. We're bouncing.
Don't be nice, we're not nice.
So we've got a couple things like kind of halfway in here and I know we're at, 7:20. We've got some ideas on setbacks that are yays and nays. When we're talking about considering each contiguous area, again, we've started to talk about that. People have talked about maximum size. The one that was thrown out was somewhere like 750 or 1,000. And we're talking about separation of those. Again, that separation depends on size. If it's smaller, then you need to let them be closer together. Versus if it's a couple thousand acres, maybe, Do we want to zoom in on one of those to discuss, so we at least get,
I think you ought to zoom in on something. We're gonna allow large ones, or we're gonna keep it restricted to smaller
you
projects?
tell
And then though the size, it gets a little more complicated. When you talk about that, are you talking about size that is all adjoining panels? Let's say you
Or
have,
applicant, size of the application that comes in, and then if we're gonna eliminate the size of it, then we can do the setbacks between the next project.
Okay, so I'd say if you talk size, let's talk within the fenced area, just so I have a definition, like it's within the fenced area. So if it's within the fenced area,
So it's not including any setbacks or.
we're talking just fenced areas, that's the actual use.
But
right?
that is included when we talked about land use one of the issues that we addressed, when you talk about just inside, it may be 1.9%, but when you look at the total amount of agricultural land that's being allocated to the project, you were at 4.6% was coming out of production for the projects with all of the setbacks.
So that's where I would
something else
say,
to
if
consider.
you want less, then the setbacks obviously impact that directly.
So from a public standpoint, I would suggest that it includes the buffers when we look at the size.
What if we can farm the buffers, and the buffers are so big, 500 feet, I think definitely that these tractors in there. You know, combine anything.
Well, the whole
500
project
feet
was
wide.
3,000 some acres.
Right. but
The other
there's
thing is
only
sometimes you have
1,000
parcels that have like large wetlands
Well,
that are
that's
not gonna be
what's
used.
Presented is
So,
3,000
it says
acres, so it
3,000.
means 3,000 acres, whatever's presented, not regardless
I
what's
think
in
it
the
wasn't
fencing or not.
explained well, because we could have farmed outside of the fence.
My legal descriptions are 3,000 acres.
Right, yeah, I understand what you're saying, yeah.
We'll then have the square footage inside the fence on the site plans for what you're saying, concerned
Still
about.
need legal descriptions.
Yeah, and we can get those as it's approved, but, so,
So if it's not farmed, then is there gonna be a part in there that says that for the people that don't wanna farm around their fence? Then that's gonna be in there too, that
typically,
it's gonna count against.
what
they're
happens,
gonna
anything that's
align.
outside the fence that's back to the landowner, it's not under the project of the solar project, it's just whatever the landowner wants to do.
That's
with
not
this
the way
land.
that the lease kind of read was though. Solar, they leased their entire parcels. So that wouldn't.
That's not
Every
correct.
lease is
That would
That's
different.
not correct.
Every lease is different.
They lease the entire parcel initially for the option.
Right.
Yeah, and then
But
they'll,
then, once the solar
Specify.
construction starts, it's basically defined what's in the fence area and what I've seen.
Yeah.
So it's not the rest of it as such.
the other thing with the
Special
fence is it's
exception
easy
is
to
for the
find.
entire amount of acreage, correct?
What's that, sorry?
The special exception, the permit is issued for the entire amount of acreage in the parcel.
So what we're also tying it to is a site plan that shows where that fenced area is.
Yes.
So in essence, you
It-
can't change, you can't increase, right? You can't get the fence closer. If they wanna decrease it, have fun. But what is then being approved for solar is within that site plan, that fenced area.
So that's what's different now than what was
Yeah.
proposed the first time. So what you're correct, but now we want
We're
more.
saying, we're gonna have
defined
to,
more
you guys
than what
wanted
it
a
was.
site, like the detailed site, that site plan that's just show our
What
fenced
about, what
area.
about the acreage that, or the land that's taken up from the buffers that they're gonna have to install around the site, or around the
That's
project?
gonna be what, I mean, it's still,
There'll be
it's
a-
not approved for
It's
solar.
still taking, I mean, I'm just saying, well, I guess, but it's still taking farmland, taking up farmland.
Well, but if you have 500 feet, you definitely can farm 500 feet.
Yeah, but how big
around.
are the buffers gonna be? How much of that are we gonna have buffers on?
You're talking about
I don't-
landscaping?
I'm talking about landscaping, like around
So that
where
would be
there's
close to the
other.
fence.
Oh, no, the setback we're talking about is just setback. Like, it's not,
I'm talking about the amount of land that we're gonna say can be taken up by solar panels.
I
Yeah.
think we're probably gonna need to tie it in order to keep it from not getting too confusing, too hard to calculate and so forth. Whatever, if we put a maximum acreage, it's going to have to be, on the solar panels area itself or inside the fenced area of the panels as such. And, you know, that can be adjusted and can take into consideration that we know there's buffers and so forth, but I
That
think
might
as
end.
far as actually defining, if you're gonna cap it at such and such or size as such, it would need to be the panels as such. Cause there'd be some situations where they farm it, others where they wouldn't. I just think it gets too burdensome to try to calculate all those acreages in.
Solar panels and ancillary equipment for there.
You're saying panel in the substation ought to be, you're saying.
your substation's gonna have a fence
The
on it too.
substation, but
But it's gotta be considered in the.
It'd be
Yeah, it's everything.
Anything that,
Yeah.
Your below ground transmission lines, I would not
no,
include.
anything above ground
Can't
that
see those
deals
now.
with the solar
Yep.
project.
So if we're good with saying, start here, saying, within the fenced area, we'll write that up more. How many acres per project, and what we basically said, if it exceeds the threshold, it shall be considered more than one project. You know, again, that would be your threshold here too for other applications, like. If something wants to be 2,000 acres and the threshold 1,000, using nice round numbers here, then there's there's two different projects. And we can talk about,
The distance
That's
between
that.
those two.
what do you want that to be?
On the maximum size of the project.
Well, I never thought of it as a project. I looked at it as a parcel, because I always would look at it as one application per parcel. And so your parcel may be 30 acres, but you're only going to put in panels 15 acres. So to me, that was one application, not a project that's included, this 15 acres is included in a 300 acre project or something. So I never looked at it as a project standpoint. I just, when I was looking things over, I looked at it as a per parcel, what was going to be panels, or actually just, I looked at it as a whole parcel myself, but we could do the panels, what's inside the fence. So, I looked at some other ordinances in other counties and things like that, and, again, if I'm looking at it just as a parcel, I was thinking 300, 400 is your cap on this one application, no more than that, and that'd be your cap on any application that came in. And I don't know what your project would be, so your project was gonna be 1,000 acres, but you have, max at 400 on this application, that until you reach your 1,000 on your project.
So let's start the
But
project
then-
though, the whole project, what is that?
We need to
Let's do
talk
that
to
first,
cap
and then
on
we
the
can
whole
get to this.
project.
Okay.
How is you approve one project? Cause then what you guys were talking about were separation of projects, right? So what is one project?
Well, you know where I stand.
Yes.
I have a question, did you not make it cap on the entire county of how many acres? Why wouldn't we start there and then do?
Others have done that. They had just said to talk about a project cap. You could talk about
Oh,
X acres. So I don't care which way we go on that. It just what they had suggested last meeting.
I mean, it
So-
might save some of your
Yeah.
individual parcels,
Had
had a cap your acreage.
I think there's probably more protection for existing property owners with a cap on the size of a particular project than there is of putting a cap on number of acres in the county.
Yeah, but you wanna protect the county, the agricultural land.
You would protect a portion of the county and once that was,
Like part of the comprehensive plan
Yes,
discusses
it
about
is.
protecting the agricultural
It is.
land.
That's correct.
So putting a cap on how much that land can be used for solar panels
Like 1%.
would.
So I'm gonna bring our conversations back in so we can all make sure I hear them all, so I write things down correctly. Do you guys wanna consider a project size or what was suggested to as a cap, like?
I think we should do the project inside the fenced area of the actual panels.
You say per project versus somebody was saying all projects, right?
I think we can talk about that second. Why don't we talk about inside of fence first, and then we can talk about a cap second?
I would agree with that. Yes,
I think it's two different things.
that's two different things, yes.
I'll throw it out there. I say 400 cap on a project with a 3-mile distance between the next project.
Well, I'm gonna
So
ask
now-
the question of a member of our audience.
Generic, okay, guys, I've got some generic things I've given.
There's a lady
Lord
here that
knows that.
actually works
Yeah.
for a solar company, and I don't really have a clue how big they have to be or to even be considered. So can you answer that question? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. So is it, I don't know, so
Well, you won't see a solar project if you put a cap of 400 acres.
that's what I was wondering. I didn't know what.
So, I mean, just, that's the honest truth. You won't see one unless you get some kind of small private.
Like a demonstration project by REMC, like in Clark, off I-65. The
Especially
general
with a
threshold,
3-mile distance.
Distance,
I mean,
because otherwise you'd have to run transmission lines for 3 miles to get to the next project per se.
yeah, it just wouldn't be. feasible.
generally what I've heard in terms of that feasibility, and you can tell me if this is, it's from, various companies across the state of encountered is, it's that 50 megawatt kind of threshold to make it even like financially reasonable to do.
How many acres is that?
I know it's probably at least 500, but I don't know. I'll look at
So
it.
in New England, the project sizes are 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts.
That's
and
not
they're
an
not
accurate comparison.
huge, not like here where, because they don't have the land, I mean, there's trees in New England. Like, so projects do come in, they just don't come in as massive as 400 megawatts.
To be that larger scale, like, wholesale back is what it's, again, from what I've heard from a couple companies, I'm just throwing out, I'm not the expert on that, but, what have others have said in other communities have looked at, so whatever that is worth.
Well, Spencer County has 200 acres maximum, and that's for the coverage of the utility scale solar facility.
Right.
Shall be a maximum of 200 acres. No utility scale solar facility shall be located within 2 miles of another existing or permitted utility scale facility unless the combined acreage coverage is 200 acres or less, and it's allotted a maximum of 1% the total acreage for the use to be developed for renewable energy.
Right, and so that's, I think what it effectively does is you can't do a commercial solar facility there then. And again, that's like up to you.
Go ahead.
One other question, or one other suggestion, I guess, is that if you put a cap of 400 acres and you didn't say there was a required distance, the BZA still has complete authority to deny further applications that come, in addition to the 400 acres. Or again, kind of like you talked about, there could be a 400 acre one that is approved, and then, 5 football fields away, another one's approved, that's 400 acres. But if you put that distance requirement on there, then you're essentially just making it so that solar is not allowed, which if that's what you want to do, but Spencer County did that so that solar wouldn't get built. So that no project has gotten built with those requirements in place.
Because a lot of places, we don't even have flat land that's a mile apart, maybe just a drop off hillside, so it wouldn't be feasible. I think we almost have to look at topography on each.
Yeah, you should have, you should require it for a application.
And
A topography map, so we can see.
We do. It's on the site plan, it has to do with topo.
and no
They have to show
removal of
listing topo.
topsoil.
But they're not gonna go on like the hilly side anyway, cause it doesn't.
That's actually in the
They
leases.
put them all over Ireland and other places on the hillside.
I mean, it was held by my.
In Indiana, it doesn't work as well because there's cheaper land elsewhere to do it. If that makes sense. Like when you look at our state in terms of the assessed value that you can charge on this, we're the lowest in the south because we do have more hilly terrain, we have just conditions that aren't as conducive. So our assessed value that
And crop yields are like.
local governments can charge is the least because we get hills as we go south, right? And that's just the nature of that beast. So that's why that assessed value is less. That the state sets, not us, like they. So,
On the plan.
you guys, again, direction's gonna come from you guys. I've got
Well, I think
within the
everybody's
fenced area.
agreed with the 400 acre, cap. Now, the next phase of that would be if we want to do distance.
Okay.
I think that's the next discussion.
I disagree. I think 100 acres is small and I'm just taking this from my point of view. We were right beside the Barkers and our daughter and the Barker's son live beside each other. I would say there's probably 400 or 500 acres there and the Jacksons live across the road. And they were also wanting solar. So we had all these people on a long drive, our road that's gravel. And there was 4 houses on it. So there were several hundred acres that would not have impacted anybody. I mean, they would have to drive by and at least another.
That's one scenario. You take every resident in the county, that's not the case.
That's
That's
but that's
very
what
few
I'm
of them
saying.
have that scenario.
They have the option, the BZA has the option of looking at these as a special exception. So they have that right to look at it. So that's what I'm saying. So if you did it larger, it may work for that parcel, but then over here, there's too many homes. And so 400 acres is too many in an area where there's a lot of houses. Like out on Highway 62, where there's 20 houses together, well, you won't maybe want 400 acres there. I'm just saying maybe the BZA can look at it, each individual project, you know, and say, okay, it works for that area. That's.
It's all, but we gotta limit, what was overwhelming is the size of the project that was
It was
presented
huge.
to us.
Yeah. Because
And I would need to get clarification from Pat to make sure that if we did anything large, that we could still break it apart and eliminate part of an application. I'm concerned that we can't do that.
We can get that
that's a good question.
for sure, but
I'm just thinking of the project we did have, and we couldn't approve it because one, we had to approve it all, because it was presented all as one project. And that was just,
Can we make that part of our?
so what's like, what somebody was recommending, so you've made it just 400, I use that number, because you've thrown that out. Per application, basically per project. Then I think what you want to consider is if it's 400, what is that separation? Like between those two, or do you have a separation between those two? Do you say it was around numbers, 1,200 acres? It would come in as 3 applications then. Does that make sense? Like,
If they can be contiguous.
yeah, you can talk about contiguous or not.
But is this a good Pat question? Should we talk to Pat about this first so that we can break down the projects and say, this doesn't work for this area, but it would work for that area?
And that's where
That was my concern. I mean, we had that situation not too long ago where we couldn't break it out.
And that's where I think if we specify that it still could be one application, but each contiguous area can be reviewed or considered separately, that's one thing. I think that we can get, I think we can get that under like, what's allowed by Indiana code. It's been, what is each project, you know what I mean? And if you're doing a separation between those or not, that's where the question in my mind. I think we can get the other aspect of that worked out. Cause I know the intention is, you guys wanna be able to consider each contiguous area. So we can get that logistically worked out in words and, you know what I mean, text, but it's, do you wanna limit project size? Do you wanna limit separation of those? And do you wanna, or do you wanna talk about an overall number of acres or something of that nature for the whole county? That's, I think, maybe the question. We can work out the logistics of how you approve these.
But the overall acres would be a separate question than where we're at here. I think Lisa was correct on that. We need
Okay.
to make a
So then-
determination on project size.
Project size.
And,
Should we ask Pat? I mean, is that, I have to Pat first and see what we can.
I don't
I don't think
it's
that's gonna.
gonna make any difference in
not
it now.
my concern goes back to just protecting farming land, agricultural land, going back to the comp plan. And that's,
Some of that could be addressed with the cap as well.
yes, and that's my point of saying the
Correct.
400 acres and 3-mile distance. That is protecting agricultural land, preserve farming, right to farm. The
And
goals
for the
in the
community,
comp plan.
that's basically, the land that you're asking for is the flat land. So it's the Saluda area, and if there's not a cap on it, then you're essentially forcing everybody else who lives out there to be included or to be surrounded.
We're gonna address the cap at a later time. We wanna get the acreage right first.
Yeah, but it sounds like you guys wanna talk about what the project size is and if and what that separation is between each of the projects. So what, I can't put a number in there for you, or I would.
You see, you thought the 400 was a hair small. Also, do you see 500 accomplishing the majority of what you would want there in those areas? I doubt if in that last one, there was 500 acres in any single contingent
Oh,
group.
no, there wasn't. I think it was 3,000 acre project, but it was only 1,000 acres of actual panels inside the fence. But it, pardon, it was 2,000.
2,000, yes.
It was 2,000.
Absolutely.
So,
The one on.
but we already said we're gonna talk about inside the fence, so that helps us.
Yeah, that was 1,000
That was
acres.
1,000, the other one's a little over
And that
2,000.
was a lot. But again, that was included in communities, you know, there was houses and that type of thing, so.
I like, well, that's 400 acres, I think, I think that's a good.
That's 400.
Starting
400 is a great number. 400 is a good number.
Okay, so then if it's more than 400, it's considered 2 projects, 2 applications. is there a separation between us? And Lynette's throwing something out too. But that's the only number I've heard thrown out.
Poor lady's had her.
Yeah, oh, yes, I don't warn it.
That's all right.
Yes.
I'm gonna tell you how I feel here. For a planning commissioner, I think you guys are, planning commissioning is doing a great job. But I personally think it's a conflict of interest of having someone that's an applicant on the board, having say so.
Ma'am,
If you're
all
still,
these other people are against it. I'm the only one that's for it, so.
that's not,
Well, we're
That's
not,
fine.
right, that's not an issue for discussion this evening, really. I understand
I
your
just don't think
concerns,
it's
but
fair.
well, you could also have the property owners they aren't many of them here this evening, if I know of any other than Lisa. You could have people in the audience this evening that would feel just the opposite, that it's not fair that we only have one property owner on the board that is, impossibly involved. We have to look out for all of the property owners in Jefferson County, not just the people that are against solar, and having them participate in the discussions. Lisa may decide not to vote on it when it comes time for a vote. And in reality, if it's where it looks like it lays, I doubt if one vote's gonna swing it one way or the other.
I'm
know,
just
there's-
saying the planning in itself.
You wanna hear from everyone involved on the planning itself. You wanna hear from the people that support the solar as well as the people that
Okay.
are absolutely against it, as well as the ones that are trying to find something in the middle.
Okay.
So no, I think it is very critical to have, people sitting at the table that have an opportunity to speak the same. I don't see that as a conflict, that'd be a decision that she'll make when it comes time to vote, and that's a separate issue. And not really what we're here on this evening.
It is 7:45, just to give you a heads up.
Yep,
Lauren. I know
yep, we're probably.
you had a hard stop at,
We're gonna probably stop this evening. We usually try to limit them to 2 hours. And,
I'm not trying to hurt your feelings or anything. I just find it, I just find it, to me, it would be hard to sit on there applying for something and having say so in it. I don't know, me personally, but
I'm gonna bring us back in,
sorry.
just
yes,
to,
let's do.
to bring us back in here, part of it. I think maybe half my role here is to try to corral us. Thanks. Again, I think that we have maybe one agreement on the battery energy storage, so I'm gonna call that a plus. We had a revisit just on the ag when maybe we have some commissioners, ag is special exception, we have some commissioners in the discussion. We have discussed, at least from setbacks, we might consider dwellings as one setback. Our 1, 2, 3 churches, schools, and cemeteries as a setback, and other, ag without a dwelling or other parcels as a setback distance. I'm gonna call that a direction. We did not talk about screening at all, like vegetative or, screening at all. Sounds like everybody was kind of maybe thinking max size within a fenced area per project is 400 acres. If not, it would be more than one project, more than one application. But we didn't talk back about that separation. I don't feel like we have any consensus on that. For the short, quick win, the other suggestion was that we already say that solar has to comply with all your local, state, federal codes, right? They're gonna have to do that anyway. There was a suggestion of saying that those panels associated equipment should be UL certified, which is the underwriter's laboratory. It's basically gone through testing and, that sort of thing. My understanding, most of the a lot of it varies. I don't know if it's particular solar. They have our state and federal codes may require some of that anyway. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if there's an agreement on that one. That might be. Give another rundown.
What, UL certification?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all right.
Maybe that one's a good one. I'm gonna call that one a win. So we didn't get to, and the other quick one might be that we talked about the panels, equipment, and buildings can't be in a flood hazard area, wetland, or waterway. that might be an easier
Yeah, figure.
win as well, if we agree with that.
Check that one off.
Two of them we just did in about 30 seconds, thank you. Just started with those. Um,
Could have put the agenda better.
well, they came at the end and I didn't wanna rearrange numbers on people, like, I didn't wanna do that. So the things that are still pending again are, if it's special exception in ag, our
And a cap.
setbacks, okay, setbacks, we didn't touch screening at all. We had something of fee schedule in there, but that wasn't necessarily proposed, that goes through a different process. So we can need to talk about consideration of each parcel, which I think might have just been taken care of with the 400 acres in my mind. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not. But you wanna put a cap for the county.
And we set a distance between fields.
We did not set that, that's still no setbacks that we know groupings. For setbacks maybe? And you guys discussed some setbacks, but I don't think we consensus on those yet, so.
Did you mention fees at the beginning?
So fees, we have that as number 16, and basically what it says is that, our fees are not outlined in our UDO. Because they're adopted, separately from UDO. So I agree that those need to be discussed and those need to be adjusted, but they're also based on what it takes to do those applications, so it's not really
It's not a public
Yeah, I
discussion.
mean, there's a public
It is-
comment period on it, but
is
it's
a
not
staff,
like,
as it
well, I
is a
think it
staff
should be this, or I
discussion.
think it should be that. It's based on it's by state statute, it's based on what it takes to actually process that application.
They're not
So-
supposed to be set up to where you're doing it as a deterrent for solar to come
Right.
in. And that's,
And so.
and they're not
But you
supposed to
wanna
be
cover
done to where you're making money off of it. as such.
Right,
You're
it
supposed to
should be done, but it
realistically
shouldn't
look
be
at it
done.
to
through UDO.
recover whatever your costs are in the process.
And one of my questions was, this might be a Mike thing, do you feel like we need a civil engineer or something to look over the plans instead of just?
Yes,
I think you need
I think we need an
additional
engineer.
staffing for that, and we do have provisions in the current ordinance, in the current fee schedule that allows for that. So it is, that's already in there, but your base fee other than, $300 might need to be a little bit more, just not saying a whole bunch, not making money like you're saying, but,
Hard to get engineered, look at conceptual.
well, and that's, so anyway, I think the fee schedule is a separate one from this discussion, because it's not for your UDO, it's for your fee schedule.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna check that one off from the UDO amendments to take a win here where I can. And then the consideration of each parcel, I think is kind of taken care of if you stay with the 400 acres, is that correct? Okay, so I'm gonna cross that one out.
So that was agreed on, the 400
The
acre.
400 is what I've put
project.
within the fenced area
Per project.
per project. Now, we haven't talked about separation of those projects or, max for the whole county or anything, but that helps to divvy up your applications, but not get like 5 acres. Each parcel individually is an application. Okay,
One other thing,
the same in
from the BZA standpoint in the application and what have you, I mentioned checklists. And is there any way that we can, have the staff work on that checklist so we can visually see it? So in an application, or work with, a subcommittee where the BZA can kind of work with the staff on this checklist, so we can make sure that everything that we've had questions, like using this past application, to make sure they're there. So when one does it to us, we already know that those questions are gonna be met,
had been answered.
or whatever.
And Lynette, you're gonna have to remind me, because I know when we did applications forms, I thought I like, for say a primary plat, for example. Don't you have like a 5-page checklist that we provide, did I provide?
Well, it was just a summary of like, we need a deed check mark, we need a check mark. We
No, it's
didn't
not,
go through
I'll show it to you after.
we didn't go
So-
through an actual,
Where we have for some communities is like on these plats, because that is not our topic, and that's a good one for us. A secondary plat or a primary plat or a development plan, whatever it may be, that, I need to plug it in. You go through, you pull everything out of the ordinance, staff checklist, and it says, you made it yes, no, or NA. If anything's a no, then obviously it can't be approved because it's against the ordinance. We didn't do like a 5-pager.
no.
So we can talk about something like that, and that's what you need. Yeah, all it is saying, do you comply with the standard of the ordinance? It's a black and white thing, it's not a,
Yeah,
but it helps staff know, does this preliminary plat comply with our ordinance, yes or no? It's all yeses.
But it needs to be detailed. It can't be vague or.
So like the one for preliminary plats is like 5 pages.
I mean, just so the questions are
Every
specific.
aspect of it.
That way when an application comes in, because that was always a concern of mine when I was down there. When a solar application comes in, I wouldn't know exactly how to say, oh, I reviewed it. I would have a hard time. My concern was signing off saying I reviewed it because I wasn't sure what needed to be required.
And it's
with
not
all
a,
that, and we never got to that.
discretionary thing, it's black and white of, does it meet everything that we need? Or-
There's several videos in Indiana that like have the checklist right in the ordinance.
It's a different level, yeah, there are items. I know exactly, I'm gonna plug this in, and
If we
just
have
see with
this
that.
checklist,
Okay.
and more specific.
So, we didn't make it.
Oh, we do.
You know what I mean, but, oh, yeah, there's that back, this been feet on.
And there's also like a background check for the sources that they give, that they are actual sources, not actors.
Yeah, that's, I'll let Pat take that one, but that would be beyond us, it'd be the same as if a resident proposed something for the BZA to.
But if you get up and you say you're an authority and you're a firefighter, or you're this or that, and then you look at it and none of this is true, they're actors. And how can any BZA make any, anything from that? That's not true.
Do we have copies that we can get of what was changed
I
or anything?
have given them to Taylor, it's up to Warren, you'll have to ask the planning commissioner, BZA, or, that is, my battery's dead, so I can't plug it, but.
But anyway, well, Warren's not here to address this, but that's something we need to have. And I think the BZA and the office ought to have some kind of input on it. Just to make us comfortable when one does come. And I do agree with Lisa, that somebody, like an engineer of some sort, ought to make sure what is being
You can do that.
right, but that's part of the checklist thing. That's involved, but that's what I would like to see before we meet. And if we need to meet a subcommittee of this committee that could look at that, I would suggest that to get the office input and then. concurrent.
Checklist outside of this ordinance, like, that's not adopted through the UDO, it's just,
No.
checklist, which way's up.
And then we need to bring the commissioners in on the cap and so forth and have some discussions with them as well.
Yes, and so there's a handful of topics that are bigger we didn't get through tonight. I'm gonna call some things we got through, at least as a, feeling like we did skip in here. So I didn't know if you wanted to close
We're
the
gonna
meeting.
close this evening.
And someone requested copies of this, and I said, I don't have that. That's
We
you.
can do that. I don't have.
Yeah, I gave extra copies, so we're gonna have, obviously, the PDF, I don't care, but I'm gonna let you guys determine how that gets out or not.
Okay.
You might want to see if they can pay the heat bill next time.
Not bothering me.
Cold.
Were you ready
That was
for me
the
to
only
stop?
one. What's that?
Ready?
Yes. I got a sweatshirt.